Things behind the scenes have officially gone out of hand if the news that is circulating in the love and hip-hop universe is even partially accurate. Production insiders are spreading rumors that a startling exchange between Mendeecees, Harris, and Sierra Gates became so tense that the producers were forced to shut down the entire set. Our supporters are now split, perplexed, and in complete disbelief. Sources claim that the entire incident began when Sierra allegedly accused Mendeecees of going too far, something he immediately denied. However, no one anticipated what came next. Insiders claim that Mendeecees, who are often composed and in control, went totally crazy. They threw furniture. Cast members were separated by crew personnel running. Mid-scene, the cameras were cut, and he had to be physically escorted off set by security. Was it simply the intensity of the situation? Or did Mendeecees go over a precipice he had been standing on for too long because of Sierra's false claim? Social media users are speculating that this might be the start of a significant franchise reorganization that would include the producers, legal teams, and possibly Yandy. We're dissecting what we've heard because this is damage, not just theater. Like most things on sets like this, it got off to a slow start. Behind the scenes, individuals were smiling, adjusting their microphones, and drinking from red Solo cups without realizing that the quiet would end after another 15 minutes. Sierra arrived later than expected. Nobody gave it any thought at first, until she entered the room wearing that expression. Her glamorous staff had been tense since the morning, chatting about something she intended to get off her chest. Not loud, not furious, simply motionless. To still, Mendeecees had already taken a seat for a lighthearted scenario that was meant to discuss forthcoming events in Atlanta, something light. Producers employed this type of scene to create tension in between more significant events. However, the air changed as the second Sierra took his place and sat across from him. The crew became aware of it. Even the sound engineer hesitated, as though his gut told him that this scene would not go as planned. Sierra didn't waste time, they stated. She briefly removed her microphone pack, made her own adjustments, and then leaned in front of the camera. She inquired as to whether they were rolling, and she turned to Mendeecees and stated it after the cameraman nodded. "I felt uneasy around you last week. Additionally, I dislike the way you speak to women." The words weren't light. They weren't the type of thing that folks on these shows would casually bring up during a discussion. Mendeecees straightened up since he had been slouching a little in his seat. Like he wasn't sure he had heard correctly, he blinked slowly. In an attempt to determine whether this was a scene or a trap, he then turned to face the producer behind the camera. "What are you discussing?" His tone was sharp, but he inquired quietly. "The kind that informs you that the quiet was fleeting." Sierra continued to watch him. "I'm referring to the time you obstructed me in the parking lot. The manner in which you pointed and leaned in. You don't speak to me in that manner." Silently, someone on set gasped, fearing the microphones wouldn't pick it up. Even though they weren't supposed to be in this scene, another cast member peered under the curtain as if they had just heard something inappropriate. Mendeecees steadily moved forward while maintaining a composed appearance. But it was clear that his jaw was tense. He said, "I never touched you. Avoid playing with that." Sierra grinned, but it wasn't a friendly one. She had the type of smile that conveyed her absolute expertise. She sat back and responded, "I never said you did, but you gave me the impression that you could." The entire atmosphere was altered by those words. The producer had already begun messaging someone behind the scenes, but the cameras continued to roll, possibly lawful. The showrunner, perhaps. Someone higher, perhaps. However, the SMS message was sent. People stopped acting like this was just another filming day. Mendeecees remained still for a while, the sort of still that frightens people. Then he got to his feet, slow and methodical. He wasn't shouting. Nothing was being thrown by him, not quite yet. He merely gazed at her while standing there. "Are you attempting to ruin me?" he inquired. "Not very much." Similar to someone who already has too many knives in his back, Sierra remained unflinching. "I'm speaking the truth." Mendeecees snorted and turned to face the ceiling as if he were looking for unobtainable patience. He began to pace behind the film team, just moving, not storming. He moved too quickly for the audio guy to follow him accurately. He was speaking, but the majority of it was low, off-mic, and filled with profanity. With her brushes still in her hand, a makeup artist silently retreated from the room. Someone inquired as to whether the scene should be cut. "No," a producer answered. "Keep going. This could be the time." Mendeecees returned to the frame and spoke the words, "You lying on me on camera? For what?" Loudly enough for everyone to hear for a second. For a headline. For what purpose? Sierra folded her arms. "Not afraid of you." He retorted, "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to figure out what you stand to gain by making me appear." Different voices began to overlap at that point. A production assistant made an attempt to speak. A microphone pack was dropped by another crew member. "Let's cool off for a second," said another, but it was too late. Already the energy had shifted. He slapped his microphone off his chest. It splintered on the floor. The boom operator muttered obscenities. Mendeecees then took up a neighboring folding chair to get it out of his way, not to hurl it. The issue was that it created unnecessary tension by loudly scraping the floor. A few seconds later, Yandy arrived. Even though she wasn't supposed to be there, it was obvious that someone had summoned her. She looked around the room to recognize the expression on his face. She had witnessed the disappointment before, not the anger. She approached him directly. Reaching for his wrist, she whispered, "Just come outside with me." However, he roughly drew his arm back and declared, "I'm not doing this. I will not allow anyone to use my name in this manner." Sierra also got to her feet. "It's not my fault if the truth makes you angry." "That was the final straw," Mendeecees said. "Cut the scene." As they turned to face the crew, "Cut it all out. I'm not engaging in this phony reality." Security intervened before he could say anything more. For the majority of the shoot, the man had been standing calmly by the wall in case things became tense. He now walked quietly but firmly in front of the Mendeecees. "Just go outside for a moment," the security instructed. The Mendeecees paused. His hands were now trembling a little. Not from fear, but from suppressing too much. He didn't shout once more, didn't use profanity. After saying, "You're going to regret this," he simply nodded once before leaving with the guard in tow and Yandy following in silence. The room remained still. Nobody knew if they should start packing things or keep rolling. Sierra glanced around, now uncertain if this was what she had intended to do or if she had overreached herself. "I said what I said," she muttered softly to herself as she sat back down and inhaled deeply. But more loud than anything else was the ensuing silence, because everyone in the room was aware that something had broken open and would be difficult to fix. The quiet after the Mendeecees departed the room had an odd quality. It was weighted in addition to being awkward. The kind of silence that follows an explosion, when the dust is still in the air and nobody knows what kind of harm has really been done. No one was talking into microphones, even though the production had not yet called cut. Crew members stood around motionless, holding cables in their hands. The energy was gone, but the cameras continued to roll. Everyone seemed to be waiting for someone else to express their thoughts. He had been followed out the side exit by Yandy at first. She remained silent. Mendeecees was pacing the lot behind the set trailers, his head cocked to the sky as if he were attempting to contain his screams. His breathing labored. With each breath, his chest rose and fell, and his hands flexed at his sides as if he were holding onto an invisible object. She gave him room by standing a few feet away. But her gaze never left his face. Finally, without turning to face her, he muttered, "They're going to use that. They're going to alter that to make me appear insane." Yandy gave a slow nod. "I understand." "Do? You believe that I touched her?" His voice cracked slightly, as if the burden of posing the question was too great. No, she replied hastily. It's too fast. She knew how awful it looked and how quickly the world can jump on a headline. Not because she had any doubts about him. At last, he looked in her direction. I've been working so hard to stay clean, to take a right. For the children. For us, I avoided being involved in drama. I wasn't even interested in returning to this program. You persuaded me to do this. Yandy took a step forward. And you've behaved well. You've performed better than expected. However, you must not allow this to break you. It was her words. It wasn't you. We are aware of the distinction. He shook his head. Nevertheless, what the truth is no longer matters. Not on camera when someone says it. Sierra was still micked up when she returned inside. After switching to a loose setup, the cameras captured reaction shots of the actors, crew, and helpers chatting among themselves. Producers were crowded over a laptop in the corner, sending frantic texts. A 10-second clip of Sierra saying, "You," made me feel like "you could" had already been clipped by someone. But everyone knew it would be circulated by morning. Around that time, Rosita arrived. She wasn't meant to be on set that day, but one phone call had her rolling up in sweats and sunglasses. No glitz, no jewelry. She had received the word, and she wanted to know directly if there was anything wrong with Mendeecees. What the devil? Took place. She walked directly into the center of the room and asked, "I just spent an hour away from Kirk." Sierra remained unflinching. I spoke the truth. Rosita gave her a long look, the type of gaze that reads every line. Every movement, every flinch that looks at your entire face. "Did he touch you?" Sierra answered in a firm tone. "I never said that," Rosita yelled, "but that's what people are going to hear. You are aware of that. Everyone is aware of that." Sierra gave a shrug. "I'm not to blame for that. He made me feel that way." Finally, one of the producers came forward, off to the side. She was shrewd, short, and constantly holding a clipboard. She declared, "Okay, we're going to pause all shooting for today. We need to speak with legal because there is too much energy in the room. We are behind schedule till further notice." But no one has been sent home yet. You sensed the change right away. The entire atmosphere became chilly as the cast dispersed and the glam teams began quietly taking up their equipment. It was withdrawal, not pandemonium. Seemed as though everyone wanted to avoid the recent events as much as possible. Mendeecees had taken a seat on the step, behind the trailer, back outside. With his elbows resting on his knees and his hands pushed together, he appeared to be praying silently. Yandy squatted next to him. He murmured, "They're going to let that ride. They will broadcast it. They may not," she remarked softly. "It's still early. They could pull it, especially if you talk to them quietly. Tell your side." He gave her a sidelong glance. "You believe they are interested in my side?" That was the issue. He had the answer beforehand. Meanwhile, word had already begun to circulate. Fans were already putting the pieces together when crew members emailed pals and friends, tweeted ominous remarks. 3 fan pages had already screen recorded and published a confusing Instagram story from one of the hairstylists. Over a grainy view of the set, it said, "Some people don't know how to act when you expose their energy." Comments came pouring in right away. "Who are you all referring to? Is this related to Mendeecees? Has anyone been removed from the show? I heard that he struck someone." When she saw the last one, Yandy's stomach turned. Without saying anything, she gave Mendeecees her phone. After reading the comment, he silently scanned through the others. "They already think so," he said. "It's currently out there." Producers were in damage control mode inside the set trailer. They had already been in touch with the legal department of VH1. Someone recommended that Sierra film a follow-up, right? A way to make clear what she meant. Sierra, however, declined. She informed them, "I said what I meant. I owe no one an explanation. No one would be requesting clarification if it had been a male who felt threatened." The producer retorted, "But you said he made you feel unsafe. There are numerous ways to interpret that." "That's not my problem," she repeated, without concern. Another person added their voice. "But it's your fault if he leaves the show because of this." Sierra remarked, "Then maybe he shouldn't have acted like that," as she appeared lifeless on camera. The producer let out a sigh. Sierra was obviously not going to walk anything back, and that, in a perverse sense, increased its value. Controversy was what the network was all about. Everyone knew that messy storyline drove ratings, even though no one acknowledged it out. Additionally, the more chaotic the scenario, the better, provided it wasn't legally explosive. Kirk was having a private conversation with Rosita in another section of the trailer. He had heard the entire narrative straight from her lips and had just arrived. "Do you believe Sierra orchestrated this?" he inquired. "I believe she was aware of what would occur," Rosita said. She desired the response. She simply didn't anticipate him going that far. "From what I heard, he didn't even do anything. No longer matters," she said. People think what they want to believe. And the harsh reality was that the damage was already done, regardless of whether it was contrived or genuine. And it refused to return. In silence, Yandy took a seat next to Mendeecees out back. She remained silent. He didn't either, not even waiting to hear his side of the story. They simply sat there together while the world began to dissect what actually transpired, moment by moment and piece by piece. Social media quickly became the catalyst for the situation to spiral out of control. The explosive altercation between Sierra and Mendeecees on the Love and Hip Hop set was the subject of 3 prominent /gossip websites within an hour. They didn't have any video. They were all devoid of quotes. However, the harm was done by the loudness of the headlines. Another post stated Mendeecees reportedly goes off after co-star's chilling confession. By the time Mendeecees returned to his phone, he had hundreds of direct messages, missed calls, and comments tagging him in every direction. One post read, "Sierra exposes Love and Hip Hop castmate for making her feel unsafe. Security called in." Nobody even wanted to know what had happened. All they were doing was taking sides. He was cautioned by Yandy not to use the internet. She had pleaded with him to avoid the blogs. However, he was powerless to stop himself. He had to see the harm. And the harm was already extensive. "I always felt aggressive around him. You can tell sometimes by the way he speaks to Yandy. This is not at all surprising. Should be permanently removed from the show if he did it." His hand slowed as he read one comment in particular as he silently skimmed through the pandemonium. He didn't like that narrative either. Quit said, "Funny how they only come for black men when they're finally getting their lives together." He didn't want politics, gender, or race to become involved. He desired for the truth to be important, but he was wiser. The trend was not truth production. Meanwhile, was in complete lockdown mode. Every camera was stopped. Every scene that was planned was put on hold. The set's enthusiasm had devolved into calculating coldness. During a call with the network, executive producers were attempting to determine whether this scandal would benefit or harm them. Others were attempting to lean against it. Others wished to completely discard the video. One producer encountered Sierra once again inside a side trailer. It was different this time. More strategy, less questions. "You must be ready for criticism," she said coolly to Sierra. Sierra said, unfazed, "I said what I said. I understand." However, the way you stated it, Tand, the way it's already being circulated, will give the impression that you accused him of touching you. Sierra arched an eyebrow. "I didn't claim that he did. I felt unsafe," I said. "I have experienced that. The producer hesitated. "Are you open to recording a confessional in which you present your case?" "Just to be clear, not to walk it back," Sierra grinned. "You mean damage control?" "I'm referring to your truth, prior to the others turning it into something else." She considered it for a while, then gave a final nod. "All right, but I'm not saying I'm sorry." The crew hurried to set up a camera. No lighting, no glam. All they needed was her, unadulterated. Sierra spoke softly and stared straight ahead as the camera began to roll. I mentioned that something was sparked by the way he approached me, Kay leaning in and talking over me, but I didn't say that Mendeecees slapped me or shoved me. I experienced rudeness. I was intimidated. And I talked about it. I don't mind whether that offends anyone. Because when something doesn't feel right, I won't keep quiet. Behind the camera, the producer remained silent. She simply ended the recording. After nodding, Mendeecees was engaged in a discussion that resembled a breakdown rather than a meeting across the lot. He sat with his jaw tight and his hands clenched across from one of the senior producers. "If you guys air that, I can't get back from this," he remarked. "Even if I express my opinion. The clip has already been released, even if Yandy endorses me. The story is already in motion. It was not denied by the producer. We're determining what to do." "No," he interrupted. "You have already worked it out. You're going to utilize it. The drama is what you want. You're looking for the numbers. You understand how this operates?" The producer answered. "It is a reality program. We demonstrate what occurs. No, you display what you wish to display. Okay? And you are aware of it." Although he didn't speak loudly, it was clear that he was in pain. This was no longer about a single moment. Covered everything he had been attempting to correct. The years spent demonstrating that he was not the same man from his past, the image and the reputation. And now all of that was sliding through his fingers with a single claim, no matter how nebulous. Made on video. While standing close by, Yandy was conversing with legal. She was looking for a clause that would shield them against alterations that were defamatory. The legal team hid behind typical contracts and was evasive and non-committal. It was obvious that they wouldn't halt anything until it went against the law, and nebulous charges didn't do that. The whole cast had heard about the scene by dusk. Some were privately texting Yandy to inquire as to whether it was real. Some were already preparing their own answers, getting ready for confessionals that weren't even authorized yet. Some of them had taken sides already, and none of them had watched the entire video. Bambi shared a picture of a black screen at home with the mysterious statement, "Some people will do anything to be seen." The meme "Every villain got a victim complex" was reposted by Scrappy. Theories were flying out of control among enthusiasts. Some people thought it was all a staging act. Others were claiming to have known Sierra would be the next big bad guy. Some were demanding that the entire program be canceled. Mendeecees and Yandy sat in their living room in the midst of all of this, in complete quiet. The children were at the home of a cousin. The lights were dim, trying to stay up with the conversation. Yandy was browsing Twitter. Mendeecees had stopped even checking his phone. "Want to return and shoot?" Softly, she inquired. He gave a head shake. "Not in this manner. Not when they are teasing my name." "So don't," she advised. "Move on." He gave her a look. "And allow the untruth to prevail." "No," she said in a whisper. "Without cameras, let the truth breathe." However, they both knew it wasn't that easy, even as she was saying it. This was more than a private moment. Now it was open to the public, going viral. And regardless of how he handled it from this point on, someone, somewhere, is going to spin it into whatever narrative worked best for them. Sierra, meantime, was still on set, giggling with her helper. She was still in the same mood. She had already begun discussing her wardrobe choices for the upcoming program. She was shown how her confession video was already viral when someone handed her a phone. She grinned and continued. "They're eating it up." She was asked if she was anxious about the criticism. She answered, "They'll forget by next week. They always do." But she knew in her heart that this drama was different. She hadn't given it much thought, but this had gone too far, 'cause those affected wouldn't forget, even if others went on. And those who witnessed the actual events wouldn't either. Even though it felt like a storm had gone, the sky remained black the next morning. No schedule had been supplied by anyone in production. No call sheets, group texts, or transport vehicles were scheduled for the upcoming shoot. The entire set seemed to have gone into pause. Hip-hop and love were unofficially put on hold. Not due to difficulties, but more because nobody understood what to do following the events involving Sierra and Mendeecees. People hadn't slept. In an attempt to keep Yandy from waking up, he had spent the night on the couch, alternating between silence and frustration. Eventually, she fell asleep next to him, still holding her phone and fully dressed. There was silence in the house. But his thoughts weren't. He kept playing the sequence over and over. Sierra's words, the expression in her eyes. The subsequent glances he received from everyone else, as though something had changed, even though he hadn't done anything, as if he had turned deadly. Since leaving, he had battled this emotion for years, striving to improve and present himself properly. And suddenly he was drawn back into a story he had fought so hard to avoid by a single sentence. Yandy awoke shortly after dawn. At first, she remained silent. Simply sat beside him and silently browsed through her phone. Additional modifications were made. Additional blogs. Someone posted a video of Mendeecees slamming his microphone to the ground, which wasn't even meant for public consumption. No sound, only that image, accompanied by the caption, "Rage is real." He remained silent. He simply got up and made his way to the kitchen. Yandy came next. In a low voice. She stated, "They're attempting to frame it like a pattern. They're unearthing old interviews and scenes. Things you mentioned years ago." He slowly shook his head. "What I say now doesn't matter, does it? Already out there." Yandy let out a sigh. "How this ends is still up to us." He faced her, or do we? Producers were rushing to get back on set. The legal team for VH1 had formally announced that until both parties had an opportunity to answer on camera, nothing would air. However, the leaks continued anyway. The draft footage had previously been shown to a friend, and it was evident that several versions of the story were circulating among the industry. Yesterday's hushed crew members were now speaking. The extras were narrating their own stories. Partial truths were being spread by assistants. Two senior producers discussed their next course of action inside a production office. "We lose the spike in ratings if we cut it. We run the risk of being sued if we air it, unless he gives his approval. He will not sign, then spin it." How? It was a chilly conversation, calculating. They weren't talking about the truth. They were talking about plots. Kirk and Rashida, meantime, were discussing what had happened at home. Late the previous evening, Kirk had spoken with Mendeecees. The brief but illuminating talk had taken place. Kirk informed her that he's hurt. "Tim, this is more than simply drama. It is larger. Because it touches on his past," Rosita said, "and his identity has already been decided." "Do you believe he will resign?" "I'm not sure," she said. "However, they'll claim it's guilt if he does. Faye will claim it's spin if he stays. In any case, he is stuck." Yandy had already made plans. She wasn't going to stand by and let it happen. She began requesting favors from trusted old producers, influencers, and bloggers. Those who could assist her in presenting his version of events before the network misrepresented them. She contacted a familiar podcast presenter, someone impartial who would allow Mendeecees to express themselves without passing judgment. It wasn't to defend himself that he ultimately consented to do it. It was because he had to face his children and admit that he didn't remain silent when someone deceived him. The podcast was unpolished. No changes, not a clip. Only a microphone and Mendeecees. On camera, he claimed, "People don't understand what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do. They are blind to the harm. They only view the video, the fury, the drama." However, there are actual individuals behind that. Families exist. History exists. And that charge persists even in the absence of evidence. Fans were split once more. As the program aired, some referred to it as damage control. He sounded genuine, according to others. Others praised Ciara for her courage in stating her mind. However, the tone changed. People were requesting the complete narrative, not just the headline. For the first time since the explosion, Ciara, however, had not made any posts. She didn't say anything. No tweets, no stories, nothing but quiet. She was instructed to keep quiet by her colleagues. Despite her frustration, she paid attention. She was unaware that a backup recording of the scene, which included all of the raw audio that the main camera missed, had been preserved by one of the microphone technicians. The video had not yet been made public. However, it did exist. And the precise tone of her allegation was audible in that recording. The silence, the smile. The words dotted had been heard in its entirety by one of the producers. Then, all of a sudden, the narrative stopped sounding so clear-cut. They discussed how to handle the unprocessed audio in a meeting with the network, without legal permission. We cannot air it, but it demonstrates intent. Intent is not unlawful. Additionally, it's not ratings. However, portions of it were already being leaked anonymously. There was a little video of her saying, "You made me feel like you could," with background laughs. It made Ciara's situation worse. Fans started to turn against her, claiming that she is manipulative, claiming that she used terror as a weapon. Once more, comment sections were overflowing. The blame was changing this time. On camera, she portrayed that man. This is the reason why actual victims are not taken seriously. She was aware of her actions. Yandy witnessed everything. She didn't rejoice. She simply glanced at the Mendeecees and stated, "This isn't over," without saying, "I told you so. Okay? But you're not by yourself." Mendeecees gave a nod. He did not. However, smile, because he was aware that something had permanently changed, even if it turned out to be true. Even if the network expressed regret. Even if the actual footage was viewed by fans. There was already a scar. The uncertainty, the headline, the quiet that ensued after he left that set. Certain items don't return to their previous state. The producers declared at the conclusion of the week that security would be stepped up and that production would resume under careful supervision. Scenes would be examined in greater detail. And in order to resolve the matter, both Ciara and Mendeecees would be asked to a private sit-down confessional. It remained to be seen if they both agreed. However, the harm was already done. Not only to trust, but also to reputations, to the truth, to the notion that reality television might still exist. You already know that there is a lot of drama in love and hip-hop if you've been watching for years. But this hit was unique. Producers are reeling. The entire ensemble is on edge, and fans are utterly split by the impact from Ciara's claim and Mendeecees' collapse. Whether Mendeecees will resume shooting, whether Ciara will step up, or whether VH1 will attempt to hide the tape before things get worse, are all unknown at this time. However, one thing is certain. Something, and not just a microphone, broke that day. Serious concerns have been expressed regarding reality TV's authenticity in light of this circumstance. When it comes to a plot, how far is too far? Will the truth finally surface, or can a single moment undo years of development? More importantly, can Mendeecees bounce back from this? Or has his reputation already suffered irreparable harm? We would want to know your thoughts. You think Ciara went too far? Was Mendeecees' response warranted? Is this the cost of being a reality star? Or should the producers have intervened earlier? Don't hesitate to share your opinions in the comments section below. In order to ensure that you never miss what's actually happening behind the scenes, please make sure to like this video. Subscribe for more exclusive updates and turn on your notifications if you're as engrossed in this drama as we are. 'Cause in our world, the story never stops, even if the cameras stop rolling.